Welcome back to the Old Fly Guy Network, where we engage with those in general aviation, making the skies safer and more enjoyable for all of us. And once again, thanks for continuing to follow us across the country as we meet exciting aviators. I'm Wade, the Old Fly Guy. And today we're at McKinney National Airfield here in McKinney, Texas. And we're visiting with Jim Wilson of Jim Wilson Photography. Welcome to the network, Jim, and thanks for allowing us in your airspace.
Thank you. Welcome. Thanks for taking the time.
We're excited about our conversation today. Jim is a general aviation enthusiast. He is a professional photographer. He owns personal aircraft, and he participates in several regional and national flying organizations. So stay with us today, because we have a lot of stuff to talk about in regard to aviation and Jim's balance in his flying and photography career. So let's get started. Jim, if we could start where we are in McKinney. How does McKinney play into your life, and is this home? How does it all work?
Well, it depends on if you talk to me or my wife, Sheila.
Okay. Well, we're going to talk about her in a minute.
I came to Texas from the Midwest in the late 70s, and my brothers and everybody else that knows me said I was born to be a Texan. I just got here a little late, and I love the state. I love the spirit. Aviation history in Texas is an incredible thing. So when I learned to fly in Illinois, I guess the question you're going to ask is why I started. And the answer that I tell people is, when I was about 5, I remember laying in the front yard on my back looking up at the sky and watching clouds roll by, and I thought, what would it be like to be able to go up there? And now to have spent 50 plus years going up there, it's no less a thrill. It's in my blood, and it's in my children's blood, and in my grandchildren's blood. And every time I line up with the runway center line, I am grateful for the blessing.
Oh, that's wonderful. So you were talking about laying on your back, looking at the clouds, looking at kind of that dream. And I love the way that kind of gives me a little tingle, actually, to think that every time you go out, you feel that same energy. But how did we get from laying on our back to that first solo? How did that happen, and where did that happen?
Well, Sheila should be here for this, because she has a different version.
And we're going to expect a little, fact check.
She has a little different version of this story, but I was just out of college, and we were in the situation you and I have talked about. We didn't have 2 nickels to rub together, and I'd been getting flying magazines since I was in high school.
Okay.
And the dream was there. So I'm in Joliet, Illinois, as a fledgling S.C. Johnson wax salesman. And in my territory, there was a little airport in Morris, Illinois. And just so happens, and every time I passed it, I would stop and look at airplanes and take my lunch hour and not eat lunch and just walk around and smell airplanes and touch them. And lo and behold, one day my flying magazine came and had a $5 demonstration ride coupon in it. And I thought, I can probably muster $5 and Sheila won't know. So the next time I was in that part of my territory, I had my $5 demonstration ride coupon. I went in and said, I got this. How does this work? And they said, well, we'll put you with this instructor who ended up being a good friend and my instructor throughout my private certificate, Bill Morrison, who flew the night mail, was an instructor and flew the night mail in Beech 18s. And so Bill walks me. I had already, because $5 was all I had.
Mm-hmm.
I had already, I bought the Cessna 150 operating manual, the little plastic book,
Mm-hmm.
and I would sit out for months before this, I'd sit in the airplane that wasn't being rented at the time and memorize all the switches. And what I had never flown in an airplane of any kind, commercial or otherwise, up until that point.
Oh, really? But you were still had that dream of getting
I
up there.
still had that dream and wondering what the other side of those clouds looked like. And so instrument panel, switches, procedures, flaps, all that. I had never experienced them actually working in the air, but I knew what they did. And so when Bill walked me around, I had already memorized all the pre-flight locations and procedures and all that.
And this was just on this was just on the Discovery type.
This was free.
Yeah.
Nothing was running, no hot speeder was running. And so we walked around and I did I said, I'll do the pre-flight, Bill, you walk me through it. So we did, and we got in the airplane and started it up, and Bill was a great guy. He said, so the rudder pedals, you don't steer it. The rudder pedals steer the nose wheel and whatever. And I said, got it. We taxied out to the active runway and did the run up, and I had the procedure down, but I'd never been in one while it was running. And so we lined up on the center line, and Bill advanced the throttle and said, you do the yoke. I'll follow you through. And so we got rolling, and the nose wheel came up, and he just kind of coaxed me through the mains leaving the ground. And I looked at him and I said, what are you doing for the next hour? And he said, teaching you to fly. And I said, forget the $5 demonstration ride. I'll figure out a way. And that was the beginning of it. And at that time, 35 hours was the minimum to get your private certificate.
Okay.
And when Bill released me the morning to go to Sugar Grove Airport, which was a 40-minute flight from Morris to meet with the examiner.
Okay.
When I landed, I had 6 minutes, 35 hours and 6 minutes I put in my logbook. And the examiner had a kind of a craggy reputation for being a rough guy. And he saw he said, let me see your logbook and whatever. I said, I have one more entry to put in it. He said, yeah, because you don't have
enough hours.
And I went, but I will. And so I wrote it in there and I totaled it. It was 35 hours and 6 minutes. And he looked at me. George Zychek was his name. I'm sure he's in heaven. George looked at me and went, 35 hours and 6 minutes. You got 6 minutes. You ready for this? And I said, yes, sir. I think I am. And so he said, well, we'll see about that. And we went out. And he beat me up for an hour and a half or whatever. And we came back in, and he never said a word. And as we walked back to the FBO, to his desk, he was walking in front of me, and I was dutifully walking behind him, thinking, did
I make it?
What did I do wrong?
Oh, okay.
He didn't say one way or the other. Didn't slap my hand. Didn't have to take the controls. Whatever. And so we get back to his desk, and he says, well, Jim, I guess I'm going to have to sign you off. And I said, well, Mr. Zychek, I'm honored. And
and then so that's where all officially you were 6 minutes in and
that was it.
Signed
and
off.
I really didn't even need a plane to fly back to Morris because I was.
I can only imagine. I remember that myself. That flight back was, I don't even recall it either because it's your head's going. Did I really get through that? And so that's great. And I think you said that you got your ticket.
Got my ticket, and coincidentally, within a few months, that was in October of '72. I had so little disposable income, and I was disposing of it. that I burned a hole in it. A lot of people learn to fly and they go out and circle their friends' houses and they go do this or they go for lunch or they. my whole focus was being ready for my flight check at 35 hours. And I didn't waste a minute or a penny. And so I didn't do a lot of that out. Probably better, because a lot of bad things happen in that ouch fooling around, not training. And Bill knew what my situation was, and he helped me stay focused on what I was doing, and he was an excellent instructor. And so I had taken a job with Caterpillar right about that time, and we were moving to Springfield, Illinois. So that's
This is after you have your ticket.
after I had my ticket, just a month or two, just really a month. So when I moved to Springfield, Illinois, I immediately went to the airport. Springfield was our hometown. It's where I met Sheila when we were 14 years old. And I immediately went to Capitol Airport and went, is there a flying club around here? And there was one that had a 172, which to me was like a 757.
After that 150.
And they had a 150. And so I joined the flying club, and then shortly after that, we moved to my sales territory in Decatur, Illinois, which was about 40 miles east of Springfield, and that's when I got into it deep. Bought a Cub, and
But I think the thing you were mentioning again on you bought a Cub. There's a kind of a little bit of a backstory to. You didn't just walk up and say, I'm going to buy that Cub. I think you sort of, it grew on you, didn't it, a little bit?
All of my time had been in 150s, and there were no Cessnas for rent at the Decatur FBO. They were a Piper dealer. And so I checked out in a Piper Cherokee and a Piper Warrior, and made some friends and started flying on trips with them, and in bigger airplanes. I got my multi-engine in a Navajo that a bank owned. A buddy of mine was the chief pilot, and he was a flight instructor. So
Here you go.
he'd call up and say, you need to be in your territory today, or you want to go to Michigan? And the answer was typically, territory is good, let's go.
Right.
And Dave Slaybaugh, who, God bless him, lives in North Carolina, and Dave was a guy that would make a great interview for you.
Well, we gotta get a hold of Dave. You're out
Dave
there. The
Slaybaugh.
story is true. Fact check this one.
Dave Slaybaugh, just a fine guy, and so my relationship with him was very young. He flew that corporate airplane. I got to know him, and I spent a lot of time with him in the Navajo. So the FBO, the guy that owned the FBO, bought a 1939 Piper Cub. Thought that would be great. People would rent it, and he could make money on it. And he kind of thought it was a cute airplane. So I saw the Cub, and I didn't have any tailwheel time at all. And for a while, for about 15 hours, I thought I was probably going to die in that airplane, because tailwheel flying conventional gear is a whole different ballgame. And so Dave Slaybaugh, one day, we were talking about it, and he said, I'm an instructor. Let me check you out in that Cub. And so Dave and I went out, and that for the first 5 or 6 hours, I honestly didn't know what direction I was going to be looking on landing, because it was my hands and feet were used to a Piper, used to a Cessna, not used to a real airplane. So Dave and I spent 5 or 6 hours, and I said, Dave, I don't think I'm ever going to get this. And he said, that's the point where you will. That's the point you reach. Wait till you see your next hour. And so we went out, and he just a wonderful guy, still friends, good friends to this day. And so I soloed the Cub, and my calf muscles and thigh muscles and everything were plenty tense, and so I soloed that airplane. And when an instructor, he's a pretty good sized guy, when an instructor gets out of any airplane, like a 150 or whatever, it flies a lot different. It flies much better. When Dave got out of the Cub, it was like a kite. And so I started building time, and I was at the airport. When I wasn't selling Caterpillar tractors, I was at the airport getting to know the Cub. And finally, after probably 4 or 5 months, the owner of the FBO came and said, "Jim, you're buying this Cub one way or the other. You're buying it by the hour," but he said, and everybody else is scared to death of it.
Mm-hmm.
So do you want to buy it? Because my idea didn't work out. And I thought, I was building an aerobatic biplane at the time. From scratch in my garage. So I thought this was going to be a little hard sell for Sheila. So I bought it and then told her, forgiveness, permission, that kind of thing.
That's probably a good choice there, but I'm kind of curious what her reaction was.
Her reaction, she's a trooper. So I bought the Cub, and I was out there flying it every day. And you could, gas was 29 cents a gallon, and it sipped 6 an hour, and so you could do that. And so I really wasn't, every once in a while I'd run a Piper or a Cessna if I needed to go somewhere, but I was burning a hole in the Cub. And that Cub introduced me to a whole bunch of other people. Charlie Hillard, one of the greatest pilots of all time, became a great personal friend. Charlie Hillard called me one day. There was an air show at Decatur, and I was chairman of the air show, very involved in EAA at the time.
Okay.
Paul Poberezny and Tom Poberezny, Paul, the founder of the EAA, great guy. Tom, his son, world aerobatic champion, incredible pilot, incredible guy, became friends of mine because of my Cub, because of the air show at Decatur. And Charlie came to me and he said, I do a 12-turn spin act, dead stick in Cubs. I don't know if you remember the Kristen Eagles.
No.
The Kristen Eagles were Charlie Hillard, Gene Soucy, and Tom Poberezny, 3 of the greatest pilots that ever held a stick. And I hired them to do they were the Red Devils at the time. They flew 3 single-seat pit specials. And Charlie said, you're paying us to be here. I can do a dead stick farmer's act in your Cub if you like. And I went, I would be honored to say Charlie Hillard flew my Cub. And so anyway, that another notch in the aviation experience. And so Decatur, I flew a lot. And then I took a job with the Caterpillar dealer in Dallas.
That was your first step back into Texas.
My first step into Texas, first time I'd ever been in Texas. And got my Cub down here, which, at 65 knots is...
Takes a few hours.
I packed a lunch.
Yeah.
And I had finished my biplane, and so I got it down here too. And the aviation community down here, it's like this all over. Aviation is we talked about that before. Aviation is a very tight-knit community.
Please expand on that, because I couldn't agree more. You see it more and more as I see it, and what the experiences and relationships.
You meet some of the most wonderful people. All have a common thread that they wondered what it looked like on the other side of those clouds.
Right.
So I got down here and I was flying the biplane. We lived in Tyler, Texas, about 60 miles east of here. I was flying the biplane. I had sold the Cub.
Okay.
Because money was tight and I shouldn't have had any airplanes at all, but thank you, Lord. So I was flying the biplane mostly, and started meeting more people in the aviation community here. My job brought me back into Dallas. I was at a little airport just west of here called Aero Country. It was Gene Soucy's home airport. Gene and Charlie and Tom were now the Kristen Eagles. Frank Christensen out of California designed a home-built kit that was the most complete home-built kit ever in the history of ever. It even all the parts were bubble wrapped on sheets, and it came with a razor blade to cut the bubble wrap to get the parts out as you built the airplane. And that was still is a very popular biplane. So Frank came to the Christian Eagle, the Red Devils, and said, if I sponsor you guys, will you fly my airplane? I'll build you 3 special ones. Will you fly them? Well, I had become friends with Tom and Gene and Charlie, and so I ended up becoming the photographer for the Christian Eagles. None of this did I ever think doing commercially. It was just a match made in heaven. Who wouldn't want to shoot
You got
airplanes?
to be around planes.
Got to be around airplanes. Got to be around the
interesting
greatest
people.
pilots that ever held a stick. And so I mounted cameras on Gene's airplane, and we got some incredible shots that ended up on the cover of. And never in a million years did I think, I should do this for a living. When I realized that I didn't want to work for a Caterpillar dealer here anymore, and Sheila said, you should think about being a commercial photographer. I kind of didn't think that was very possible. But I had all these connections. And aviation, I knew that I wasn't going to make a living solely with aviation at that point, and that I needed to shoot other things, construction.
Okay.
No weddings, no food, no fashion, but construction was right up my alley because of my time with Cat. So I started shooting different construction projects and things, and that helped me kind of.
Was this while you were still working for Cat, or you'd made a sort of a transition?
It took me about a year to make a transition from Cat to where I went, okay, I'm leaving.
Okay.
And I was still way out on a limb, but I was out on God's limb, and so it was all right.
Okay.
And so I shot a lot of construction projects, started shooting from the air, got more and more business. Well, that's great, but can you do it from the air? And I said, can I ever? And so I started doing that. Of course, drones were not even in anybody's imagination at the time. So I bought my Cub back. Bought my Cub back from the guy I sold it to in Kansas City. Called me one day, the Lord's plan, because our deal was, I'll sell you this Cub. I love it. It taught me how to fly. But if you ever sell it,
You got the
call
first
me.
right.
Well, he called me about this time and said, they're closing my airport, and the next one is too far and too expensive. Do you want to buy your Cub back? So I went to Sheila.
For a second pass, did you ask for forgiveness or just go for
the office of the budget? And I said, honey, I can shoot a lot of construction projects out of this Cub. And I won't have to be renting a helicopter, which is uber expensive.
Mm-hmm.
And so she said, do what you need to do. And so I really built my business by shooting construction projects out of the Cub. And then as that blossomed, aviation, because there's a lot of people now that say, Jim, I want to do what you do. And I'll go, I understand that, and I want to do what I do. I love what I do, and but here's the deal: you can't just do this, and you can't just do aviation. You can't. My grandson says, "Papa, I love to shoot," and he's a good photographer. I love to shoot anything, but if it doesn't have an afterburner, I kind of lose interest.
Okay.
Well, that's up to you, but you can't eat doing that. So, if you like acorns and living under a bridge. Go for it. So the construction progress and finished architecture and all that started to bring our bottom line up to a livable point. And I thought, what other markets do I want to shoot for? Automotive racing, of course, motorcycle racing and that kind of stuff. But my number one was aviation. But you find out very quickly that there are 1 million people that will shoot aviation for free, just to be there.
Just to the experience.
And I understand that. the thing that I realized as my experience level grew and my contacts grew and whatever is that from a marketing standpoint, what you had to do is go to a flight museum or an aviation manufacturing company and go, I know that you've got a guy in packaging with a camera who loves aviation and shoots it for free. I have this amount of experience. I have a military trained formation pilot that flies me. We do extensive briefs. We do. So I understand that paying a photographer is a considerable expense versus having a guy in packaging do it for free. But look at what you're risking. You're risking lives in all those airplanes, the subject, the photo platform. You're risking anywhere from tens of thousands to millions of dollars of airplanes, because as cool as it looks, and it does, it is an experience of a lifetime. When you're up there, you realize that if any of your team has a lapse in attention, people die, and airplanes are lost, and whatever. And it's sobering, and I don't want to make it overly dramatic because you will see me in the back of the photo ship, whatever it is, going.
Oh, yeah.
You're on top of a cloud deck at sunset, and you have whatever it is, a T-38 or it doesn't matter, a 182 or whatever, cruising around so close you can reach out. It's an experience, and it's an experience that I like to share safely with people who I think have the heart for that, and then they can go on and do what they want to do with that experience. And several have gone on to be excellent aviation photographers, and of course I've learned from close friends like Paul Bowen, who is the name in air-to-air photography. Paul mentored me, put me in the tail of a B-25 bomber, and I could never thank him enough for that.
And you were showing me some of those pictures before we got on the camera here, and like you said, it's a bit of it's absolute skill. Like you said, there was a bit of luck and timing involved.
It's better to be lucky than good.
Yeah, and you've I think what you told me is that you since 1980, when did you start the full transition into full-time photography?
I left Caterpillar and went all the way out on that limb in March of 1982.
Okay.
And it's funny because Gene Soucy, there's a little bit of a transition, because when people are used to you, people will say, I'll shoot that for free. And I go, really? Yeah, I understand the emotion that you want to shoot, that you shoot that for free to be there and to get the experience. It's a little bit of a hurdle to go, I did that for free for you yesterday. Today, the number's a little higher. So you kind of have to humbly massage that transition to the point where they go, he's worth paying.
It's that value they've got to click on their side of the equation.
He's worth paying because we don't want to be dead. And the other thing is even if you don't get dead, the difference in most people, who's a guy who loves aviation and loves photography and will shoot pictures, I can, and I mean this, I don't mean this as hubris, but if it can be gotten, I'll get it. We'll go up and your hour of expense with the B-25 and your subject airplane and your safety and all that, we'll come back with
the right.
We'll come back with the shots that'll make
the right picture to make that the right decision.
Yeah.
So we were talking about the Cub that you bought back, and that got sold somewhere along the line.
A friend of mine who was starting a franchise business and at the time he didn't have a lot of money, but he was starting to take off, and I taught him how to fly in the Cub, and I was a little short on camera gear at the time and a little short on funds, and he came to me and he said, Jim, I'll make you a deal. Let me buy the Cub. You can use the money to buy camera gear. You can fly the Cub anytime you want, and anytime you want it back, I'll sell it to you for what you sold it to me for.
Pretty nice deal.
Well, pretty nice deal. It's a good thing sometimes to have those things in writing.
Okay.
So that didn't work out. However, all things worked to those. Because I wouldn't have this Cub if I still had my 39, and this Cub is so much
Yeah,
better.
we're going to get into that in just a minute. I want to hear that story.
But so I did that, and I still continued to fly that Cub. But Jim, my friend, as we taxied out one day from Madison Airport in the Cub, we taxied by a hangar that had a polished P-51 sitting in it, and Jim had about, 2 hours in the Cub, and he said, someday I'm going to own one of those. And I went, sure, but you shouldn't smoke that stuff
While we're flying.
while we're flying, or preparing to fly. But never say never, because Jim ended up with about 5 hangars at Edison Airport filled with warbirds beyond the imagination. And so he hung the Cub in his museum, and was when I wanted it back, was a little hesitant to do the deal as it was stated. So about the same time, a guy over in Sulphur Springs had the dream to start building new Cubs, only build them better, and at Darren Hart and the Legend Aircraft, and that was his dream, still is his dream, except he's pumping out the most beautiful Cubs you've ever seen.
And he sort of, as you were telling me, just a quick backstory, he sort of picked that up because he saw a need in the marketplace and decided to...
He wanted to went up to Washington State to buy some Cub components, and the guy told him it'd be 5 years before he could deliver it. And on the flight home, he thought, well, seems to be a need there. And so Darren, I did not know Darren at that time, and when I heard that there was a Cub company starting up in Sulphur Springs, I went over and met him, and he said, in 6 months I'll have something for you to fly. And I said, okay. And so 6 months he called me, and I went over and spent the day flying the prototype for this. And at lunch I bought one, and I should have bought 2. I should have bought 3.
The story of all of our lives at
Don't
one
know that
time.
my marriage would have stood that at the time, because hindsight's 2020. But I bought 7 Papa Charlie, which is my grandchildren named the N number because 7 is God's perfect number of completion. So all my N numbers have had 7 in it. And Papa Cub is Papa Charlie is Papa's Cub. So it's 7 Papa's Cub.
Oh, that's wonderful. And I think that I didn't know, and maybe some of our audience here doesn't know that, I mean, this is just not the older version
This is
of
not
the
your
Cub.
grandfather's Cub.
Right. This is not only structurally built, I think, different. You said many of the Cubs I've seen at one place or another, there's no no avionics in or whatever.
You gotta prop
This
them.
is a little different story.
This, if you look at it, many times if I'm stopping to get fuel or something, people will run up and go, "That's the most beautifully restored Piper Cub." And I went, "Well, thank you, but this is built in Sulphur Springs." And they went, "Really?" And I said, "Yeah, and it's the best of the best as far as Piper Cubs." The fuselage is 3.5 inches wider. The tubing is all new. It's all TIG welded. It's by a guy who puts they call it a stack of dimes. Was
Just puts it around it. Mm-hmm.
Absolutely gorgeous. The paint's done by a guy who, everybody at Legend Aircraft is in love with aviation and the product, and so you end up with this. So I do pretty much all of American Legend Aircraft's photography and videography. We'll go up in 2 Cubs, and I put my feet out on the strut, sit sideways, and shoot back down if whatever. And but flying this airplane is, see, you get out of an antique Cub, and I battled, before I bought that, I battled a little bit with the history of an antique Cub. I'm over the history.
Performance.
This airplane, and not having to worry about is that tubing rusty. Is that Continental 65, that's an 0200, brand new one. Is my Continental 65 going to, the cylinder is going to give out because it's been overhauled 8 times. It's a wonderful product, and when you bring it over for an annual, you're like bringing one of their children home to them. There's not a company in existence that has the heart that Darren Hart and his wife
And with
have.
that quality, you were telling me, I believe, that they have a high demand for that product.
They
and
do.
They're putting them out
They do.
as
They
quick
can.
as they can in a quality product. So I hope they get a chance to see this and reflect on that was in their shop.
If they stick with you, I think we'll be arranging an interview with you and Darren and a little factory tour, and they can see how it's really done.
That's good. It's a really, really pretty plane. You just, I think, at the out when you first look at it, you think, oh, that's just a standard Cub at first. But you get up close, and again, our group wouldn't know this, but while you were helping us we got set up for this discussion, and everybody kind of, we're in a hangar, we're in kind of like, real airspace here, and you were polishing her up, and from my perspective, it looked pretty clean to start with, but you were over there cleaning it up, and you also told me that I thought was interesting for your grandchildren's benefit, that you said, even if you wanted to get rid of this or whatever, that wasn't going to happen because
They would vote it down.
that would be voted down, and it would be a bad career development move to get rid of it. But and with that, because you were telling me you have a couple of children and a number of grandchildren.
2 children, 9 grandchildren, and 1 great-grandchild. And Chandler, who is the excellent photographer, and close to all of them, but Chandler was really bitten by the aviation bug. He's, you've seen it. There's a difference between people go, yeah, that's cool, and people go,
That.
And we're that. And so Chandler probably has 100 hours plus in that Cub, and he's a very good stick. And he is soloed, and he's going to be working on his private certificate. And is talking about maybe going to the Air Force, or maybe going to the airlines, or in sequence.
Something staying with it, and it clearly he's got the bug. And you were saying, taking your other grandchildren up and around, and what a cool experience that must be for you. And I don't, even though you kind of talk like you could do something different, I know where it isn't going anywhere.
I'll share a photograph with you that I stuck a GoPro on the instrument panel, and Chandler and I were up, and he was probably, I don't know, 9 or 10 or whatever. And to me, it's a photograph that describes the joy of aviation.
That wide open.
So and that's how we fly it. Somebody one day, I took off, and it was about 40 degrees, and one of the guys in the tower said, Jim, it's 40 degrees out there. And I said, yeah, but I don't even know if the doors and the windows fit. Because I've never closed them. And so Chandler's in the front seat, and we got the doors down, and it's a day like today, and we're out in the afternoon over the green pastures, and it's a picture of Chandler, and I'm flying from the back, Chandler's sitting in the front seat, and he's just thinking and enjoying. He's a quiet guy, deep thinking quiet guy, and all of a sudden he just goes like this out the end, and that's the picture. And I'm in the back behind him, and you can see the fields below, and he's just flying his hands.
Mm-hmm.
And Legend has used it a number of times in their ads, but they have a thing called "Where Will the Legend Life Take You?"
Mm-hmm.
And that's where it's taken us.
Oh, and that's they're lucky to have you sharing that with them. And I even though I know they are lucky and they're getting that great experience, I know that hits home with you.
It does.
Big time.
It does. And Darren and Randy are like family, and I love them, and my grandkids love them. James, the third, is 6 years old, and he now, I taxi with him and get him all used to the sensations for a year or two, because I don't want him to be touching buttons and or getting scared,
trained,
or do whatever. So James Cup, he was probably 4.5 or 5, and I put him in the back seat because he said, Papa, we've taxied enough. I want to fly. And I said, I get it. And so we went out. And I've got pictures I'll share with you of that. And when we went out, we go out in the pattern. I stay very close to the runway. One of the beauties of this is this airplane stalls at 27 miles an hour. If anything happened to this airplane, I could land on the roof of Walmart and go have a sandwich. And that's a great comfort when you have precious cargo. And besides the flying experience, I have guys that fly Global Expresses, and we'll go out on a Saturday afternoon and watch the sunset, and they'll come back speechless because they forgot
what that
why
looked like.
they started.
Yeah, and I find that in my discussions as well, is that flying big aircraft and all those journeys, but so many people really enjoy getting back to the fundamentals in something like this, because it's to the core of what they really started with, and it never leaves them at the end of the day.
We're about to embark on a journey that will be the extreme of what we're talking about, and that's a good friend and client of mine is Ross Perot Jr. I shot for his dad for years, and Ross and I have become good friends, and I've shot for him for years. And his head of aviation, a wonderful guy named Ched Bart, who incidentally worked his way up through flight instruction and flying the night mail and Barons with engines on fire in the dark and all the things that go with the night mail, now heads up all of his aviation enterprises and flies his Gulfstream 650 ERs, and is getting rated in his Bell 407. So Ched called me and said, Jim, I need to pick your brain a little bit. This was a couple of months ago, and he said, we have discovered Ross's family's 1939 Piper Cub in a barn in Missouri, and we bought it, and we want to restore it. Ross wants to restore it, and I asked him, do you want to restore it, like to hang it in the corporate office or at the airport, or
airworthy?
And Ross, being Ross, said, no, I want to fly it. And it was the first airplane that Ross ever rode in. And so we're going to have Darren, we're going to pick it up in Missouri. Darren's going to go up and get it, load it in a trailer, and start the restoration process in Sulphur Springs. And we're going to do a few mods to it because we don't think we want Ross out there propping an antique airplane. I don't even want to do that anymore. I need both of these.
Right.
And so it's going to go through the restoration process, and keep your eye peeled, because in whatever period of time it takes Darren Hart to work his magic, you'll be seeing that in the Grand Champion Circle at Oshkosh.
Oh.
But
that was in 1939.
1939. Yeah. But that's not the highlight for me. The highlight for me is that a guy who is typed in his 650 ER wants to fly a Cub, and the experiences that we'll have together while we're doing that.
Well, you'll be side by side there, my gut says, when you get that going.
We will. And Ched is a wonderful guy, and I'm a very good friend, and so I'm looking forward to flying.
It almost sounds like you have fun at all of this. I don't want to break it to anybody, but it sounds like you kind of enjoy the journey and making up new stuff all the time.
Don't share this with my clients.
Okay, that's what I.
But I would do this for free.
He doesn't really mean that to you, but it's an emotional thing.
Against my own recommendation.
Against his own recommendation, but
if I had to.
But the enjoyment is there. Speaking of, we talked about the Cub a lot. What other kind of stuff? I know you've had other aircraft. You mentioned the T6. You mentioned, what are some other things that you've...
T6 is on the wall over there on takeoff. A while back, I sat down and went through my logbook, and I think I've flown about 30 different types of aircraft. Most of them are, Piper Navajo, Piper Arrow, Saratoga, Cessna 210, Cessna 150, 172, 177, garden variety airplanes. So garden variety flying is as good as,
Yeah, nothing wrong with it.
it's like that thing, a good day, a bad day at the office is, a good day fishing is better than a bad day at the
Yeah,
office.
right.
But I've also gotten to fly a Billy Mitchell B-25 bomber.
I'm trying to think you logged that in your book.
Yes, yeah, and then highlighted.
Yeah.
I've even got the flight that I did where I flew Dick Collins 172 on a photo mission as the pilot, not the photographer, shooting a friend of mine in a Pitts S2A. And I've got that underlined because to fly with Dick Collins and to fly his airplane and to watch him photograph. And each one of those are little igniters to go, look at that. I took, a good buddy of mine lives in Austin, Glenn Watson. You can look him up. I think his Mach .1 Aviation was a consultant for Dell. The guy, Tech Help Advanced, you call and you got a problem with a Dell computer. I took Glenn with me on a B-25 and I put him in the tail with me and we photographed air to air. Glenn quit Dell. I said, Glenn.
You mean after the ride?
I said, Glenn, don't do that.
Yeah.
Give this some thought. He quit Dell. He is one of the best aviation photographers that I know, and a wonderful guy. If you look up his website, you'll see some of the things he's done. He built relationships with the Thunderbirds, the Blues, a bunch of aerobatic guys, and really now he's a corporate jet pilot. Flew for Envoy for a while, and then billed his hours there, and he flies corporate jets, but still loves photography. Every once in a while, he'll send me a picture, and so you never know. One of the biggest things, the biggest responsibilities that I feel is at an air show or somewhere you're displaying your work or whatever, and people come up and go, I want to do what you do. Your knee jerk is to go, yeah, I get it.
Yeah.
But in my heart, I go, every person that comes to me and says that is me in 1982. And some of those people, most of those people won't rise to the level of a Glenn Watson or a Paul Bowen or whatever. But some of those people will. And so the last thing that you want to do is go, yeah, good luck to you. Like somebody asked Ansel Adams one time over his moonrise over Hernandez. Have you heard that story?
No.
And it's a fledgling photographer who idolized Ansel Adams and wanted to be a landscape photographer. Mr. Adams, what's the key to a shot like that? And Ansel was a pretty craggy old guy. And he said, well, remember two things. Because what? And the kid's just hanging on Ansel's words. And he goes, F8 and be there. The kid just went. and Ansel turned around and walked away. And camera settings and being there when it happens is important, but you don't ever want to dash anybody's hopes.
That's right.
Because somebody could be the next Ansel or the next Paul Bowen or the next Glenn Watson. Good friend of mine, Larry Grace. I'm vice chair of a group called the Society for Aviation Photography, International Society for Aviation Photography. And Larry is a fine guy, great photographer, has a real heart for mentoring. He's into kids and will stop what he's doing at an air show to take a kid to let him get a shot that he never dreamed of ever getting, then it's a wonderful thing that I admire about Larry. And so together we lead this 400 or 500 member international group of aviation photographers. We meet up at different air shows, and and I have a website. Actually, that Mustang picture over there that I showed you on the clouds.
Right.
I never, 9 or 10 years ago, I'd never posted anything because I was too busy trying to make a living and post another client. And I did that shoot of the Mustang, and I came home and thought I got to share this with somebody. So I went to a site called Fred Miranda. That has all different categories of photography, and they didn't have an aviation category, so they stuck me under architecture and transportation.
Transportation, well, that could be.
And I posted that. I started a thread called Mustang Air to Air, and because I didn't think this, I mean, I was posting a picture of a Mustang, and I posted that very picture on the wall there, Mustang Air to Air, and it was 8 or 9 years ago. We now have, we broke, aviation photography wasn't a big thing then.
And wasn't that long ago? You're talking 8 or 9 years.
We broke Fred Miranda's server, and then we broke it, then he fixed it, and we broke it again. And in the third iteration that's going on now, that the server is up to the task, we're at over 9 million views. And I have met dear friends from all over the world, some of whom have come to shoot air shows with me. Some I'll never meet, but they are dear friends. A lot of them, when I shot the Alliance Air Show for Ross for 25 years, they would come in from all of Holland and then
and they knew that picture.
Germany, and that picture was what started our relationships. So we're at, I think, on the sequel, it's called, we're on 1,200 pages, and 9.2 million views, and it's a conversation. And it's interesting because prior to that, if you posted a wildlife shot in city streets and architecture, you got your hand slapped. And you were told, put that in wildlife. We have 9 million views. Fred's liking that. And so it's a conversation among friends. We have wildlife. We have portraits of grandkids. We have all excellent photographers.
We're going to have to get me that information, and we'll post that up and see if we can boost that 9.2 up to something else, which is...
It's a wonderful group across all ethnicities, all social strata, international. I mean, and when we do get to meet up,
it's sort of, you talk... One of my thoughts and kind of one of the questions I was going to have, but you've really answered it through this whole conversation, is kind of that balance between photography and aviation, and how, at first, before we've had a lot of time to spend together, I go through my head and I kind of think there's this bucket and there's this bucket, but no, these buckets they're one bucket, and how you balance that. How you balance your joy, excitement of aviation, your joy of photography, and how it's kind of like 1 and 1 is 3.
Yep.
You've made 1 and 1 3 in the process. So it's been very interesting to hear about how you balance those two things and those relationships. I kind of want to go back to that just for a second. That camaraderie that goes into the aviation goes into the probably just as well as photography, right? I mean, everything you talk about is a relationship that is tied into when you think about it, some pictures or flying, but it's deeper.
Pictures of flying. you can't. It's fun. It's funny how your relationship changes. my relationship with Ross changed. I was a vendor. I mean, I was a photographer, and he's as gracious as can be. A wonderful guy to work for. But when we spent a few hours air to air within reach of each other, doing 185 knots at sunset, we came back and we had a different relationship. And that happens with most everybody. I mean, you do an article in Flying Magazine, you have a Beechcraft test pilot or whatever, and you fly with them and hi bye. But when you have those kinds of relationships with existing clients, and you do something that is so magical that
It changes relationship totally.
It does.
And everything you've told me about the different relationships, from somebody, we're talking about Ross, or we're talking about you mentioned some relationships, this people around this area, and how that all comes together. And when you're up there flying with them, and that trust and that confidence and that discipline that all gets laid out there, because you are trusting. You talked about the dangers of some of that, and you better have know what you're doing.
Yeah. And everybody, the briefs. Another question that people come to me, and I'm sure they come to everybody else that's involved in photography and aviation. I'm like, well, Jim, I got a friend with an airplane, and how do I go up and take a picture of him from another airplane? And once again, you don't want to dash anybody's hopes, but I've seen that movie. You don't do that, You do that if you want a big sky little airplane.
Yeah.
Then go ahead and knock yourself out. But it's so easy at even at speeds of normal general aviation airplanes. But when you up it to 200 knots, to
It's moving along pretty good.
to 500 or 600 knots, a blink of an eye. And you don't until you, and we've all, those of us that do it, we've all seen it, and it takes your breath away, not in a good way, because you'll see rough air or something, and all of a sudden you'll see a wing or something coming towards you, and you go, has he got it?
Yeah.
Have we got it? Is my guy backing away? Is because all it takes is that, and everybody's gone.
Mm-hmm.
But I'll tell you, when it goes right, and it's always gone right, when you come back from that, I have a shot that I'll show you that I took in case I ever do a book, and I have no plans for doing a book. But it's a shot of me. I just lean back. The old Greek catharsis plays that people used to go to be completely emotionally wrung out, and that's air-to-air photography, because are the airplanes going to run, especially if you're shooting warbirds? Are they going to stay running? Is there going to be a mechanical? Is there going to be a mechanical in the air, or are we never going to get off the ground because something's leaking oil and we're not going to go? Is the weather going to move in? And by the time you're up there and it's actually in your sights and you're capturing this, it's so intense that you're getting it, and it's incredible, but you don't even let yourself. Sometimes when it's going so good, I go. In the old days, do I have film in my camera? Dude, obviously I didn't leave a lens cap on because I could see something,
but I'm sure there may be one or two of those.
Is my memory card corrupt? This is too good.
Right.
This is working too perfectly, and you come back. So I'm coming back one afternoon. It probably was that one with the T-38 and the reflection on the clouds, and I'm coming back and I've got. I don't smoke, but if I did, it kind of makes you want to light one up. And I got my feet crossed and my tennis shoes hanging out of the B-25 out into the air, and I shot a picture framed by the B-25 with my feet crossed out there, and I just go, that kind of says it all. It's
the highs on and on. One of the things that I like to ask a question, because you just talked about the wings being this close and, all the things that happen. Has there ever been a time that you got close enough that really something happened that didn't go the way you wanted?
Yeah. One comes to mind, and it kind of changed my whole I have, because of 50 years of doing this, I have little things that kind of make the hair on the back of my neck stand up. And one of them is when you get somewhere, and even if it's for a major publication, pilot journal, plane and pilot, flying, whatever, you get somewhere and you have a subject airplane being flown by a guy that you don't know who says, that's a good enough brief. We're good, let's go. I've learned over the years because in the beginning you don't carry the weight. You don't feel like you should because it's life and death. But you don't feel like you carry the weight to go, I'm calling this off.
Right. Call a no-go on that.
I'm calling a knock it off. And but now I don't have a hesitation calling a knock it off. And one instance, there was a guy on the field here, and his fiance worked at the FBO or something, and he had seen some of my work, and he wanted to get it. He had an A36 Bonanza, beautiful Bonanza. Wanted an air-to-air. And so we set it up, and she was going to give it to him as some kind of birthday present or something. And so we go up, and I had my guy who was formation trained. I had a safety pilot watching everything so that my guy doesn't have to look around. And then I'm in the back. And it was in an airplane very similar to the Saratoga. It was a Lance. And the guy's in the... So we brief, but the guy's very disinterested in
the guy that's driving flying the Bonanza.
Very, very... The brief is a waste of his time. And so we taxi out and we talk with my safety pilot and everything. We talk about that. And I said, got a feeling here, guys. Heads up. And so I'm sitting looking backwards, shooting out the baggage door, and comes off of that. Which is FAA approved. And I'm looking back down below the horizontal stabilizer, and so we take off, and the instructions in the brief were we take off, not in formation, keep us in sight. When we get out of the airport traffic area, I want you, and I had shown him on the ground where I want you to fly. And I purposely used a longer lens because I didn't want him very close. That varies depending on who you're flying with. I got guys that I can brush the dust off, the bugs off the front of the airplane. So I said, this is where I want you. I want you to fly in altitude and a heading, and we will fly on you. And you don't need to do anything, altitude and a heading. Evening, smooth air, not bouncing around, we're good. We take off. This guy is out in the weeds. I go, I think that's that's him out there on the horizon. So we talk him back in, and he turns back in towards us. And I'm on the left side of the airplane, and I said, guys, I can't tell right now, but he's coming right for the wing route, which would put him in the right spot if he's got control of his airplane. But if I tell you to brake, don't say what. If I tell you to brake, immediately brake up and off. And they said, roger that. And that guy, and as he was coming in, I said, he's coming in full gallop, and he does not have command of his aircraft. So I'm shooting away, and at the point where I thought this is going to get too close too fast, I said brake, and we pulled up and over, and I got the shot, but I only got a couple of them because I didn't let him get close. And my guy, and my safety pilot said, Jim, I just glanced back, and all I could see was his prop and nose bowl going through your open door. And I said, yeah. I said, matter of 3 or 4 seconds, and he would have flown right through the middle of our airplane. So we get back on the ground, and he was so behind the airplane, he was not even cognizant of how far behind the airplane he was. And so I show him, it was film, so I couldn't show him a shot. So I send him some proofs, and he picks one and says, it's great. couple weeks later, his girlfriend comes to me and says, he'd really like to do that again. I said, that, I appreciate that. I'm glad he liked the shot, but we won't be doing that again. She said, well, why? And I said, because formation flying is a little different than what he's used to doing, which is punching the autopilot button and sitting with his hands folded. So that was the closest one, and that was way too close.
Yeah.
And it kind of reshaped how I feel about briefs and who I fly with.
Yeah, a lot of lessons in that, and kind of reinforces the logistics and that the value of the brief and being very deliberate. What I like also is I'm going to use the maturity that you took and you've grown to be able to say stop.
Well, maturity is not a word that's been used in conjunction with my name often.
Well, I'm going to go out on a limb because I made that word up, by the way, but I see that in what you said, because it isn't easy to say no, say stop. I was speaking with another pilot, and he has a very similar, not photograph, but talked about making some tough decisions and standing up to the situation and knowing what's right and what's wrong. You prepared for it, your team was ready, and they made sure you were out of harm's way.
I also make sure before a brief, before the subject airplane and pilot is even there, to make sure that my team understands that I'm not the only one to call a knock it off. If Scott Perdue, who you will meet, flies me on a lot of my missions, and Scott knows. Scott will come to me and go, I got a bad feeling about this. And I go, you got a bad feeling about it, we're not doing it.
Right.
So my safety pilot and my pilot have the ability to go, even if I'm going, yeah, I really want this, they have the ability to go, yeah, well, but we're not going.
Mm-hmm.
Because it's the thing that people don't realize is how fast it goes back.
Mm-hmm.
It is incredible when it's going good, and it is incredibly bad when it goes bad.
Because it's pretty fast. You don't have time to react.
And the number, you talk about the people I've been blessed to call friends, and the number of people that are not with us anymore. Absolutely, some of the best pilots that ever pushed a rudder pedal, but it's lurking out there, and the slightest inattention. Charlie Hillard. When they quit being the Kristen Eagles and they all retired and went their own way, Gene flies an ag cat with a wing walker on it and does an incredible act. Tom Poberezny went back to managing the Experimental Aircraft Association, and since has passed away, cancer. And Charlie called me and he said, Jim, I can hardly wait to show you the airplane that you're going to be photographing. And it was the Lone Star Fury. It was a Hawker Sea Fury painted up in the colors of the Lone Star flag.
Okay.
And Charlie was so excited about it. His helmet had the star on it, and had wingtip generators, smoke generators, and with the elliptical wing of a Sea Fury, that will tie those smoke trails in knots and figure eights.
Okay.
And it's a wonderful.
As long as you know what you're doing with the plane,
You know what you're doing. Charlie would make low passes down the runway in his air show act doing 400 knots, and 3 minutes after he's gone, you can hear this. You can see the smoke tying itself in figure eights and crackling, and but it was a big airplane, and Charlie was great a pilot as he was, world champion. He at Sun and Fun, and I was supposed to be with him, but I had a shoot on the West Coast and couldn't go. I was with him in Phoenix, and then he went to Sun and Fun, and I went to the West Coast. Charlie was killed in a land, of all the things that Charlie had done, all the aviation records, skydiving records, Charlie was killed in a landing roll accident.
Oh, boy.
He tried to make the first turn off because they were rushing him because the next act needed to be on the runway. And he hit the brakes too hard, and the airplane went over on its back, and they didn't have the equipment to get him out of it before he suffocated. The instrument panel pushed on it. those, every one of those experiences makes me realize that those guys have more time turning the landing light on and off than I've got total time in my logbook. And if something can happen to them, something can happen.
Could happen to anybody.
So you dot all the I's, you cross all the T's, and you hope the good Lord keeps you in the palm of his hand.
Great story of not only kind of all the wonder in the aviation and the photography, but some of the challenges that we all, the inherent risks that goes along with it, and balancing that.
Part of that is and some pilots might argue, part of that is, a little bit of that is the moth to the flame, because you love it so much, and you come back in and you land after doing it, and you taxi in, and part of that is that I lived.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I did it well, and I lived,
And so I'm gonna,
and I lived to do it again another day.
I was talking with an aviator yesterday, and he was a naval aviator flying F-14s and stuff, and he used a very similar, how he pushed it, while he knew all the risks and he practiced whatever, he still, their nature was to push it
Fighter pilots
to the absolute limit, but still in his mind it was still safe. And and so wonderful fellow, and but that mindset that goes on is really, really cool. Would you kind of thinking, I think you blended a lot of this together, but one of the things I like to explore a little bit here is advice to others. You talked about, somebody walks up and say they want to be a photographer or aviation. Is there any advice you might offer to young people who either want to get into aviation, how they might think about that, or making it work? Because for you, it was laying on your back. It was a $5 coupon. It was eventually buying. I don't want to point at that. It's not the same. You've taught me that. But what wisdom might you share with those?
Well, we live in a whole different world than I grew up in.
Mm-hmm. $5 won't get you the
$5 won't even get an instructor to look at you.
Right.
But even if it did, kids these days have, and kids, I mean, under 20, they have more discretionary income, and they have parents that are willing to, and there's financing for the ones that don't. If tomorrow you're 20 and you wanted to go from 0 time to airline transport rating, there's all kinds of financial help, whatever. And the difference between then, my dad, and Sheila jokes about it often, my dad, I wanted to be an airline pilot. And my dad knew it. My dad was a Navy pilot, flew Hellcats. And I asked my dad, I said, would you introduce me? He lived in Chicago at the time. Could you introduce me to some TWA guys or whatever when I was 16, 17? And he said, yeah, I can. He said, but I won't. And I said, why? And he said, because they'll tell you. They're just airborne bus drivers. They just sit up there and they're airborne bus drivers, and it's a boring job and whatever. And I go, man, I can't believe that's true, but thanks for the help. And I know a lot of commercial pilots. There are, the old joke is it's hours of boredom punctuated by moments of stark terror.
Mm-hmm.
I know very few that didn't love every minute of it. Air traffic control, congestion, and weather, and all this. But that's like my photography. There's a million different elements that are lurking out there to goof up a photo shoot.
Right.
I know they're there. I navigate them. I love the photo shoot.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the same thing. I don't know very many pilots. I know a couple of Air Force guys that flew transports, And when they got out, and they never thought about it again. I know very few people that weren't smitten by what do the other side of the clouds look like. So what I tell anybody that asks me now is I try and move them towards a flight school that I know will be a good flight school for them. That won't just be using up their money on the taxiway.
Okay.
And we got somebody who made it again.
This is live fire here, so everybody's got to appreciate that. Your father was a military aviator.
We trained at a Glenview Naval Air Station in north of Chicago. Carrier qualified on the Wolverine in Lake Michigan.
Okay.
The war ended before he saw combat, but he flew T-6s and flew Hellcats.
Wow. No, I didn't know that. I'll make sure.
And my dad, who was a very serious guy, very responsible fiscally, was vice president of marketing for AT&T, or the Bell system. And my dad always loved it. We'd go to an air show, or we'd go to an airport and walk up and down the runway, up and down the grass, and look at airplanes and touch airplanes and stuff. And but he would never let himself do it because he had a family to raise, and he wanted a sailboat, but he would never let himself. And we were never wealthy, but we were very comfortable.
Yeah.
Dad could have had a sailboat, Dad could have had a plane, but he would never let himself do it because in his mind that would be
he'd be sacrificing you in some way, and so that
would be irresponsible. That would take his mind off of the job and whatever. But he loved it, and one of the things that he loved about me that I found out, and my dad died partly because of that. My dad died of pancreatic cancer at 57.
Oh, okay.
So
it's a young man.
I wish he'd had a sailboat. I wish he'd had an airplane. He might not have died of pancreatic cancer at 57.
Well, let me move back because I'm going to come back to that. Let's pick it up here. We're gonna I'm going to kind of re-intro about you were talking about the bus driver.
We didn't finish the bus driver.
Yeah. So we're going to do the bus. So Jim, you're saying we were talking about the pilots. Some of them feel, or you thought that, or your father thought it might be more of a bus driver in the air. But I know your experience with other pilots have been a bit different than that. I
have friends that fly commercially. I have friends that fly for UPS and for FedEx, and my friend here that flies to Saratoga here is a 777 international guy, and they'll send me pictures from the cockpit of a cloud formation of a sunset over the North Atlantic, or they're not driving a bus.
Right.
I'm sure there are times when they go,
"This."
But
I gotta believe that we talked about that bug that you catch, and it all plays together. And getting up is better than being on the ground, probably, and so that's really wonderful.
It's funny because you'll be at a party, any kind of gathering, and somebody will say, "Well, Jim's a pilot," and they'll go, "Oh." You get two kinds of people who go, "Oh, I read about him every day. I'd never get in one of those things," and then you get the other people that go, "Tell me about it."
Yes, right.
I've always wanted to. And for the people that go, I understand that. You do read about it. It's sensationalized. You do read about it every day. And I dealt with that early in my flying career because I was kind of like a double-edged sword. I wanted to do this, but you do read about them a lot. And I put that to rest in my mind by researching just about every aviation accident. You could look at it as it's kind of morbid, but I researched every aviation accident that I could to see what went wrong. Mm-hmm. What did he do? And when you go through the aviation accidents, typically you can go, unlikely I'd ever do that. Unlikely I'd ever be a student pilot in a Cessna 150 with 20 hours and take off in the fog.
Right.
Unlikely that I would take off on a cross-country trip with an eighth of a tank of fuel, which is, by the way, the number one cause of general aviation airplanes falling out of the sky.
Fuel starvation.
Fuel starvation, and not because something went wrong, except something went wrong behind the stick.
That's right.
So you can pretty much, if you're a heads up guy, you can pretty much put those fears to rest because you go, I'm not doing that. I'm not doing that. I could do that. I'm going to tuck that in my memory. When I bought that airplane, Darren told me when the glass tubes, just about the most fuel-proof fuel system in the world, glass tubes in the end of the tank. When you can't see fuel anymore in the glass tube, you still have an hour. And I went, no, Darren, I don't. And I will never get to that point.
Right.
And he said, just so you know.
Just
and I said, okay, I
yeah,
appreciate it.
but you never want to be there.
When that glass tube is half empty, I'm in an emergency.
Right. You're thinking about that's an emergency for you. Again, it's those guardrails that we put on ourselves.
And I only burn 8 gallons an hour in that. So.
Right.
T6 was a different deal.
Yeah, that'd probably go through a lot more fuel.
Yes, sir.
Jim, this has been really, really wonderful.
I've enjoyed it.
The experience, I think I told you before we started, I think I get more out of this than anybody else because the networking and the ability to hear other successes, hear the challenges, laugh a little bit, realize there's some serious nature in what we do. Whether it's not an aviator I don't talk to, we don't get to that point, and you can tell looking in their eyes that they know it's a serious business and they take it seriously, and they're the ones that are not going to take off in the fog and with no fuel. So
if they don't, the hair on the back of your neck stands up and you begin to believe in the Darwin theory.
Yeah, something. I would ask you before we start to kind of shut down, I'd like to kind of, you have a lot of experience, a lot of life experience, flying experience, any life lesson that Jim lives by or would pass on, whether it's his children or just a friend, on how to navigate your life and how to make it all work.
Well, I
and that's not easy, I know, but I'm guessing you got something for us.
I have, like everybody, I have my list of if I had an opportunity for a do-over, I would do over, but probably would do most of them the same way.
Right. Okay.
My philosophy has been, and I don't know that this answers your question. Flying and pursuing excellence in flight,
Okay.
techniques and the experience has been tied. It's like we were talking about photography and flying. For me, it's
All in the same.
It's kind of indistinguishable because capturing what I feel and what I see is one of my joys. The shots of Glenn and all of his airplanes up there, you never know when. Those were all on easels at his funeral service, and I did his funeral service. We took those because they were fun and we loved the experience and everything. You never know where your photographs are going to be used. Still doesn't answer your question. Flying for me has been, and photography in a way, because I'm always kind of pushing my limits. My faith, God's blessings, the ability to do what I've done, see what I've seen. It's very difficult for me to describe how much that has meant to me and who I am, and how grateful I am that I've had those experiences, and in some cases that I can pass some of those on. I'm not a huge mentor guy because I'm moving so fast that it's kind of hard to do that sometimes. But I guess I am to my grandchildren. I am to my kids. And I am to the occasional person who asks me the question. I guess my philosophy is don't ever get the big head because you might have been doing something completely different. take joy in what you do. Don't try not to make it work. See God in everything you do, because He is. And I hope I have a few more in front of me, but I'm just very grateful.
You beat me to the word, because the time we've spent together, I would crescendo that with being grateful for what you have. From the moment we walked in here and talked about things, and it's quite an impressive hangar, a successful operation you have going on, but it never, from the get-go, I got to tell you, it was clearly you're grateful for what you have, and so congratulations on all that.
Thank you. We call in Mustang Air to Air, in my thread Mustang Air to Air, all the guys call this HQ. And we, when the Alliance Air Show was in full swing every year, I would have anywhere from 10 to 20, 25 guys come in from all over the world, and we'd get Hudgens barbecue and put on a spread here, and we'd fly and take pictures and hang out a couple of days.
I told you when I walked in, I said, this is a living quarters. This is kind of got spoiled. You spoiled me real quick in this hangar environment. So thank you for allowing me to do that.
You're welcome.
And thank you for spending some time for us today. Thank you very much, Jim.
You're welcome.
I hope everybody's enjoyed the conversation. I know I have. Jim's got some spots. He's going to give us some, not only he's going to provide some pictures for our video, but as well as some links to places you can go check out. And we'll take that, what was it, 9.2 million or 5.2 million? And we got
9.2 something.
Yeah, 9.2 something. We're going to try to all help take that up to the next level for Jim. And help us continue the mission of meeting, exciting aviators and hearing exciting stories like Jim's. Subscribe to the channel, provide some feedback. Let us know what you'd like to see, where you'd like us to go. I know Jim has mentioned a couple of times he's going to hook us up with some new stories and some exciting stories. So I'm sure he'll do that. It's going to be a lot of fun. And as always, let's avoid that turbulence. Look for those blue skies.
If you're close to HQ, come by for lunch.
That's right. Here we go. So you got an invite. It's a beautiful place. Come see Jim, and we look forward to seeing you on our next Old Fly Guy conversation.